Next Curve.
Good evening, good morning. Welcome to this special edition of Next Curve's Rethink Webcast with special guest Foong King Yew, a former Gartner colleague of mine and prominent ICT industry analyst. And it's great to have you, Foong. It's been a long time coming, and now we finally have you on, and this is a great privilege. So thank you so much for joining. And today, we will be talking about the future of the telco operator. And I know that, Foong, you've been one of the key voices in the call for CSPs to reinvent themselves. You've published extensively about this topic at Gartner and currently now as an industry analyst. And I've used your research extensively in the consulting work that I've done, and doing some of these projects for and advising global operators and NEPs. And so this is going to be really interesting, and I'm very excited to get your insights and your thoughts into this topic. And so what I wanted to start off with is some of the challenges that you see CSPs facing today. And because, reinvention is something that is an imperative for the industry, for the players in the industry. But what are some of the challenges that you see that are driving this burning platform?
Firstly, thanks very much, Leonard, for the invitation from NextCurve to present or to have a dialogue here, on this very interesting topic. And you're right, it's been a long time coming.
Yeah, a long time coming.
Right. Firstly, the telecom operators, or shall I say the communication service providers, or CSPs, for short, they are now at a crossroads, right? Their business model has always been based on spending 15% of their revenues on CapEx, investing heavily on infrastructure. And in recent times, right, they have invested so much money, but their core products and services have been commoditized. And because of competition, they do not have the pricing power as well, right? So a lot of the internet-based companies, the over-the-top players, have fundamentally captured most of the economic value that has been created by these networks. Now, at the same time, the CSPs have tried to diversify into adjacent markets, but not many have succeeded because of the challenges, the lack of understanding of the market, or lack of credibility for them to play effectively in that role. Right. So fundamentally, although they are now pushing into new areas to find growth, they have to do a few things as well. And one of them is to have a better control of their operating costs and operational efficiencies, right? And this is where the concept of the telco cloud comes in. Now, I've seen this movement has started to gain momentum, particularly with the major CSPs in the Western world. And it's going to be a very interesting journey, moving forward, particularly along two dimensions, right? There's going to be a fundamental shift from hardware to software, from proprietary infrastructure, application, and software to more of an open source concept, right? So we are seeing these two fundamental shifts, will happen and percolate through the market. And another interesting thing also is that the advent of 5G. Now, to get the full benefits of 5G, the CSPs need to embrace virtualization and need to embrace cloud architecture as well. So taking all these concepts together, right, this is where I see a lot of momentum in the telco cloud.
Yeah, but don't you see that there's a significant amount of legacy thinking that's holding a lot of the CSPs back? Because, even with SDN NFV, it's been kind of a slog, right? I mean, the industry has been talking about SDN NFV for over a decade, and still progress has been a bit spotty. It's been a challenging transformation for telco. So, what are your observations there in terms of the challenge there with dealing with these new models as you've described them of operating, and maybe even thinking about the types of services that they will need to now pursue in order to capture some of that economic value and maybe not miss out on the 5G boat this time, right? Because with 4G, the OTT players or the over-the-top players that you mentioned, I mean, they took this gold mine of a business, which was their texting business, right? And so social networking and messaging services basically disintermediated the carrier. So what are your thoughts on the legacy thinking burden?
I think one have to approach this question, right, from a global perspective. So when we look at the entire universe of CSPs out there in the market today, right, they can be segmented into a few categories. One is the large, major CSPs, the likes of AT&T, Verizon, Vodafone, or Telefonica. We have gone, adopted a more aggressive approach towards SDN, NFV, and also towards the cloud, right? And that's also because many of these large CSPs, they have some internal resources and capabilities in-house to enable them to get an early start, right? But the majority of CSPs around the world are also, in a sense, adopting a wait-and-see attitude. Because they lack the capabilities and they are unsure of the risk that are involved. So they would want to see how these big players manage the transition from the traditional architecture to the cloud-based architecture before they take the lead.
Right.
Now, a third category, which is very interesting, is we are seeing some greenfield operators or greenfield CSPs coming in, right? And they have no legacy infrastructure, no legacy thinking or baggage, right? The likes of a Rakuten Mobile in Japan or Reliance Jio in India. Now, these players, they can, right from day one, embrace the telco cloud and embrace a different sort of thinking to disrupt the existing markets. So we are seeing these three distinct groups of CSPs tussling it out in the market. Now, let's say 5 years from now, I foresee that we are going to see a new category of CSPs emerging. Right, I call it the cloud-adept CSP. Now, this CSP will be one that would have embraced extensively the cloud computing infrastructure and technologies, into their telecom network infrastructure fabric. Right? They would be using containers and embracing all kinds of cloud processes, DevOps, Agile IT, and they would have transformed their traditional processes. Because the old way of running the operations, right, will not work well in the future.
Right.
This, in a way, will also require many traditional telecom roles or positions to be substantially redesigned. Right. So the culture of the organization of this cloud-adept CSP, the culture of the organization has to change as well. Right? So they need to bring in fresh thinking, new blood, and they also need to figure out what to do with the existing human resources that they have right now.
Right.
Which to retain, which to retrain, and to redeploy into areas where they best fit the new organizations.
Right.
Now, all these I see will be tremendous challenges in the years ahead for many CSPs, and they need to start thinking now, not only from a technology perspective, but also from a processes and organizational culture aspects as well.
Right. Yeah, I kind of call it the distributed web scale mindset. It's taking the ideas of web scale, but then now having to think through, okay, now how do I apply these concepts in a distributed architecture or infrastructure, right? Versus what you would see with a hyperscaler, which you'll have only a few nodes or big megaplex data centers. So yeah, it's going to be interesting because it's something that the hyperscalers don't know all that well either. So it's a greenfield opportunity for innovation from an organizational and cultural perspective. But that's going to be a very interesting journey, I think, going forward.
Now, with this COVID-19 situation, it's very interesting as well because the buzzword around the CSPs these days are the terms such as resiliency, agility, and scalability. Right? With a lot of workers telecommuting, working from home, all of a sudden, the home broadband has become the lifeline for many organizations and enterprises worldwide. And all of a sudden, overnight, the CSPs have to ensure that the reliability of the home broadband has to be up to the same level of standard as that of a corporate IP VPN network, for instance. And with so many video conferencing going on, they have to ensure that the services are reliable, not being disrupted, and that their network can scale accordingly to the demand. Right. So now all these plays very nicely to the story or the narrative of the CSPs having to move to a cloud-based architecture, moving forward.
Yeah. So one of the things that I thought was really interesting, back in 2018 when I went to MWC, they presented this one slide. The GSMA presented this one slide where they showed that CSP revenues were going to, over the next 5 years, would grow at a CAGR of about 1%, right? Yet the data consumption, the capacity needs would grow 4 times or fourfold over the 5 years. And so while the CSPs apparently in the most recent GSMA report will be investing 1.1 trillion, I think, US dollars over the next 5 years into infrastructure, revamping in particular 5G. The question is, well, how will they be able to recoup that investment? Because when you look at the revenue growth forecast and then all that money that they're going to be spending on revitalizing their or reinventing their operations as well as their infrastructure, I think it's going to be an interesting challenge for them. And you mentioned telco cloud. I know that that's a big cost efficiency play for them, right? Cost efficiency, scalability play for them. But I think it's going to be interesting to see what are some of those adjacent market opportunities that you mentioned before that they can viably go after. And I think that that's really one of the big question marks out there right now in the industry that CSPs seem to be still struggling with today. And I know that you have a lot of perspective on that. So I was wondering if you had any updated thoughts, because I know all of your old thoughts. I've read all of them.
Now that's the $1 billion question, isn't it, Leonard?
Still? It has to be a $1.1 trillion question plus, right?
I think as a guideline, right? And to be sure, right? It's a very pertinent question being asked by every CSP CEO, worldwide. For me personally, I believe the opportunities really lie in the space where different technologies intersect, right? 5G on its own, standalone on its own, right? You're not going to make it, right?
Right.
But the successful CSP will be one who will be able to pull together a combination of technologies to build a solution that is targeted towards solving a well-defined enterprise business challenge. Now, with 5G, there's some very interesting technologies that are starting to come together or coalesce, right? You have 5G, you have cloud computing, edge computing, the IoT, and together with analytics and artificial intelligence. Now, if a creative, innovative CSP were to be able to pull all this together and create a compelling solution and then target specific industry verticals, now that will be a very interesting value proposition to the enterprise market. Now, the challenge for a lot of the CSPs is this. They lack the expertise in analytics, in AI, and also in cloud computing. And that's where I believe they need to find suitable strategic partners that can help them on their journey. And they have to be very careful about this as well, right? Because some of these partners have the more valuable parts of the technology that creates the lion's share of the economic value, which means that for every $1 that's been created, that the CSPs will probably get a smaller percentage of that $1, whereas the partners will get more of it. So there is an asymmetric partnership conundrum that the CSPs have to resolve.
Well, that's the interesting thing about the telco cloud. While the industry is so focused on telco cloud, there is this emerging dialogue around MEC or multi-access edge computing. The thing is that the edge clouds that will be basically hosted by these cloudlets or MEC nodes, that seems to be really where a lot of the cloud, what we've seen in terms of the cloud value proposition and the economic value that cloud computing has been able to capture, that's going to be extended out across the telco cloud, right? So it's almost like the telco cloud is going to enable the edge cloud. And the question is, how good are the operators at operating edge clouds, right? In conjunction with the telco cloud. And are they good enough to do it, or are they going to have some of these quote unquote partners work with them in co-opetition? It's more likely going to be co-opetition to make edge cloud infrastructures available to customers, whether it's consumers or enterprises, And I think that's where this whole Microsoft, some of the stuff that's happened with Microsoft, where it becomes really interesting.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I would say only a handful of CSPs really have the capabilities that you talk about, right? And for the majority, they will need to partner very judiciously, right? Now, the good thing, right, is that a lot of the cloud-based companies like Microsoft, Amazon, Google, they are also competing with each other, right? So from that sense, from a bargaining power perspective, the CSPs should be able to, get a good deal from the cloud players, because the competition is so intense, right? Microsoft acquired Affirmed Networks and Meta Switch just recently. I think the deal has not really closed, but and that is in line with how the market is evolving. It's so competitive that each of them are trying to differentiate to have a better value proposition which they can put forward with the CSPs. Right now, Microsoft is good in AI, cloud computing, analytics as well, and they have the edge cloud capabilities as well. But they do not have the physical presence at the edge, and that's where they need the CSPs to come on board as well. Right. So there is a lot of synergistic play there, right? And at the same time, with these two acquisitions, Microsoft has actually added to their value proposition as well, in the sense that they have a broad portfolio of technology and capabilities which they can present to the CSPs. So a lot of interesting developments is anticipated, I think, moving forward because of this.
My take on the Microsoft Metaswitch acquisition of Metaswitch and Affirmed Networks is that, unlike what we've seen with AWS and with Google, where they're really just basically trying to host some of the operational systems for CSPs, like with their partner. Well, I guess they have partnerships with Netcracker and Amdocs. They're more of a hands-off, let's say, type of. They're taking more of a hands-off partnership mode of working with, some of these telco technology companies, where it seems like Microsoft is actually becoming a Ericsson / Nokia / Huawei competitor, right? With Metaswitch, they're acquiring a 5G packet core. They're getting a whole portfolio of UCaaS products and solutions, VoLTE, and I think with Affirmed Networks, they have like a EPC as well as a 5G core offering and a bunch of IoT. They have a broad portfolio of solutions and services that really mirror what you would kind of see typically from a Huawei or a Nokia or a Ericsson on the carrier side of their business. Well, in particular for Huawei, since they have enterprise and consumer. But I think that's one of the interesting differences with the Microsoft move here versus the other cloud players. It's also is reflective of a trend, mega trend that we cited in our study for that we did for Ofcom. We call it the under the bottom phenomenon, which is UTB, right? So instead of over the top, it's under the bottom. It's players like Microsoft, like Facebook with their TIP initiative and Open RAN, and these non-traditional telco tech players coming in and not only bringing a new set of technologies, but also services, right, that will further disrupt and challenge traditional telco business models.
From my perspective, I think it's still very early days, right? They are relatively small acquisitions for Microsoft. So it's to me the early steps along the journey. But having said that, it is a very clear acknowledgement to me that the migration of the CSPs to the telco cloud is real. And there are tremendous opportunities for vendors there. And Microsoft does not want to miss out on this piece of the pie, right? And the second point I would like to make also is around the 5G story. Now, a lot of several countries, the United States with the CBRS spectrum, the Scandinavian countries, Germany, UK, Japan, the governments in these countries have allocated some spectrum to industries for them to build their own private networks. So in other words, right, this presents an opening for Microsoft as well, that they could participate in this private wireless network market, right? Coming into competition with the Nokias, Ericssons, and Huawei's of this world, which is another opportunity for Microsoft. Now,
that's a very good point, by the way. Very good point.
Thank you. Now, the only issue here is that this complicates matters so far as the relationship between Microsoft and the CSPs are concerned. Right? It's going to be a complex relationship. Microsoft can be a vendor, a partner, or
or a competitor.
Or competitor. Right?
That's the word you were looking for.
I try to find that word. You're right. Or a competitor. Now, some CSPs may be uncomfortable with that, right? Others may say, okay, let's live and let live. We'll cooperate here. We'll compete on this other area, and in a very well-defined space. But for some CSPs, they may not like this type of situations, right? So in this sense, moving forward, the relationship between Microsoft and the CSPs would have to be handled delicately.
No, I totally agree with you. And so I think that's one of the problems that stymied RCS, right? It was being headed up by Google, and what CSP wants Google to head up the next generation of messaging protocol, right? Because Google Messenger and Facebook, I mean, they basically stole their lunch. So this whole idea is one of the things I recently posted on LinkedIn. I just threw it out there. It's like this idea of co-opetition sounds really great, but how many instances do we actually see it yielding some sort of long-lasting coalition and a collective value? I think that's a big, it ends up being a hypothesis or a theory. I think it's very difficult to realize value through a co-opetition type relationship. And I think I totally agree with you. That is going to be the big challenge. And it's going to be interesting to see if Microsoft can make these hens lay eggs. But one thing's for certain, they've taken two pretty significant US players in the telco tech and software industry off of the table. So we'll see what happens. And the other thing that I think is really interesting is if you look at the newly formed Open RAN Policy Coalition, there's no Nokia, there's no Huawei, there's no Ericsson, right? None of the traditional players are there, but you do have the likes of Google, AWS, and of course Facebook, because they're sort of the steering chair of that whole TIP initiative. And so it's a perfect example of the UTB that I was mentioning before.
Even this, Open RAN, or let's broaden the concept to open source, right? It's going to trigger a very pivotal change in the industry, and it pulls back to the initial, dialogue that we had around cost. Right, because of the lack of growth and the need to invest, the CSPs really need to have a good control of their cost, right? And it is a way for the CSPs to overcome the lock-in by the traditional, telecom vendors. And in fact, some of the major CSPs are really pushing the vendors to open up. And some have even invested in some of these open RAN companies, right? To ensure that there is choice, and it helps the CSPs to increase their bargaining power vis-a-vis the traditional equipment vendors. So my point of view is I believe open source, while it's still in its infancy today, nonetheless, it is here to stay, and it can only get stronger over the years. So, as you rightly pointed out, very interesting days ahead for the industry.
Yeah, I agree. And it's fun. It's fun covering this topic with you. And I really appreciate your time. This is a really great conversation. And I hope that our audience gets a lot out of it. It's real, like I said, it's a real privilege to have you on this chat. And hopefully we can do it again on a different topic, not too asimilar, but. So, Foong, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your insights. It was absolutely fantastic. And now, if our audience would like to find out more about your research, where should they go?
Oh, that's the $1 million question, Leonard.
Literally, right?
Well, if anyone is interested, they can always reach me on the LinkedIn platform. I'll be happy to have an offline private discussion with anyone regarding telecom strategy or how the future may unfold around the topics that we have discussed around 5G, open source, and market opportunities.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, and I highly recommend Foong. Great guy, very knowledgeable, very insightful and thoughtful, and again, fantastic to have you. And if you're interested in NextCurve's research, please check out our Rethink Research blog at www.next-curve.com. And you can also subscribe to our podcast and YouTube channels. Just search for NextCurve. And so with that, thank you for joining us today. Foong, once again, thank you. Be safe, be healthy.
Thank you, Leonard. Be safe yourselves too. Bye-bye.
Visit us at www.next-curve.com.